Welcome again to BetaCast, the video cast from BetaI or BetaI on YouTube. I'm Alisson Avila, and this is our tourism season in partnership with NEST, the Innovation Lab from the Portuguese Tourism Board. And as you probably know already, we are running this season because, well, the tourism industry is facing an undeniable transformation due to the COVID-19 scenario, with plenty of challenges, but also opportunities to do things better in terms of personal health, environment, and safety. Not to mention the visitors' behavioral shifts, asking for more circular, greener actions from all the industry agents. And that's why today we'll talk about circular economy models in the tourism sector with an expert on the topic, and also our recent Lisbon Tourism Summit special guests, Leila Akaroglu. Leila, thank you so much for being here. Thank you again for our time. But I would like to start by inviting you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work and your career so far.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I am a designer and a sociologist and a social entrepreneur. I have a long background in sustainability when it comes to product design and the way in which the industrial manufacturing sector works. I spent a long time working in life cycle assessment, which is a bit of a nerdy way of looking at how things move through the economy and the impact that those actions have on the natural environment. And then I kind of transitioned to working in education, and I started my own school for adults called the Unschool, where we teach systems, sustainability, and design. And the reason I did that was because first of all, I think that life is a long-term learning experience, right? So we always have opportunities to learn more. But I was noticing that a lot of people who had studied whatever profession, whether it be they were themselves designers or business people, that there was a lack of knowledge on how to take action on things that they were passionate about, especially when it came to like environmental and social issues. So yeah, I started a school and I've been running that for several years. We do programs all over the world. And I also founded an experiential project on a farm in Portugal to help kind of create a living learning laboratory concept, because nature is one of the best educators we have. To help understand how we can solve complex problems, understanding natural solutions to them, because nature has been doing it for a few million years quite successfully. So yeah, I do a few different things, and these days I work a lot with organizations around the world, including like the United Nations and of course, companies, to help them transform to the circular economy.
Amazing. So Leila, going straight to the point, the circular economy can still be eventually perceived as a topic where the gap between discourse or speech and actions keeps quite big. I know this is a general, an overview question, but how long will it take, in your opinion, for circular economy practices to really become mainstream? I mean, what's your time perspective on the transition to a more tangible circular society and economy?
Well, I think the gap between knowledge and action exists in regards to a lot of things, because humans have this thing called cognitive dissonance, which is literally the definition of the gap between what we think we'll do and what we actually do. Yeah. And unfortunately, what behavioral economists have found is that when people are made aware of their dissonance, so when it becomes obvious to them that their actions don't align with their values or their perceptions of their values, that rather than kind of do the research and figure out what's going on, most people just change their opinions. So it's like if somebody is caught doing something that they are kind of caught out on, then they often kind of scurry back into their hole and go, I don't want to deal with it, which is a really big problem, because, it's kind of part of our society to not appreciate failure or when something doesn't work out, which is just an opportunity to learn something, right? Like the cool thing about being a designer is when I was in design school, I learned to break things. And the reason you break things is not like just to understand how they work, but is to find the weakest point in something. So if you're designing a product, you have to figure out what doesn't work in it so that you can get it better. So that's that iteration mindset. And I think that that's something that we kind of lack in general in society, is the idea that when something doesn't work out the way you want it to work out, or instead of being frustrated or upset, or you can have those emotions as well, but then also seeing the nuggets of gold in that experience. So when it comes to sustainability and the circular economy, there is a lot of trial and error. For sure, it is a new industry. Figuring out how to rectify the problems of the past is going to be a long-term thing, right? It's not like we all just wake up tomorrow and be like, well, we can just flip the switch on the whole economy and everything will suddenly...
Push the button.
Yeah, anti-waste. No, it's not that simple. If it was easy, it would have been done already. I think the thing is that we have a lot of undoing we need to do, not just in our own value set, the way we see the world, what we value, why it is so easy for us to waste things, because ultimately the circular economy is about designing waste out of the entire system, so that things are, the value cycles increase rather than decrease, because that's how it is right now. And that we ultimately have to find ways of reconfiguring things. And I do not by any means think that that has to involve us losing out. So I think historically, people have assumed that doing green things has meant, you know, going back to the dark ages, being boring, you know, all of this kind of iconic ideas of what it is, when in fact, it's just a progressive part of how we evolve and develop. We now know that our actions as humans within the economy have negative impacts on the systems that sustain us. So it's just common sense that we would then figure out how to adjust those negative things so that we can live more positively on the planet, especially if we have kids and we care about their future, because ultimately it's them who are going to have to deal with the worst climate and the worst natural environment. So for me, the disconnect that you discuss, it's a natural cognitive component of us humans. It's everyone has it, but the practical elements of how to overcome that is, first of all, understanding that we live in a complex interconnected system and that every human alive today is reliant on nature. You cannot escape that. You have to breathe. So fundamentally, figuring out that part is really important, because immediately once you see it, the things around you in the natural world, then you start to respect them. And through respect, we actually change our relationship. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is also having a value set that actually speaks to intergenerational equity. So companies and organizations that do not think about long-term impacts of their actions and they're only focused on the short-term benefits are basically stealing from the future. And that's a really tragic thing. It's a tragic mindset to have within an organization, because what it does is it says that we're just going to kind of hoard all of the resources now for ourselves and not think about how to distribute or share them with the people around us that we care about. So I think those two mindset shifts are really important, as is the practical demonstration of success. So as humans as well, we're social animals. When we see other people succeed, we're like, yay, we can do it too. So that's been part of the zero waste movement, where people have demonstrated through different social media platforms how easy it is to actually adjust to a more sustainable lifestyle, and how it's not about losing things, it's about gaining things. A lot of the time you gain new skills, you gain new relationships with food, you get healthier. Like if you can protein swap, there are so many health benefits for reducing reliance on meat, that it's like the list is so long. The same if you walk or ride your bike somewhere, all of the health benefits. So it doesn't always have to be about loss. And I think that that's one of the big cognitive barriers, is that a CEO will sit there and think, oh God, I have to do all of these things and I'm going to lose money and I'm going to lose this. No, you're going to actually gain more customers because you have a stronger values alignment with them. You're going to gain higher quality staff because they're going to be more motivated by your purpose and ethics. And you're going to gain more innovation and competitive advantage, because the future is only going to be sustainable. Otherwise, we don't exist. So it's like, there are so many positives. It's really about flipping that mindset, and that helps overcome a lot of those barriers.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Probably it's interesting, one of your last comments, like probably one of the negative side, let's say, of the extreme focus on being agile or being in a fast company is to avoid or try to avoid thinking on the long term. And this is also connects with one of your comments during this answer, which is people's behavior. And let's try to narrow down a bit on the tourism industry. For you, what could be the role of people's behavioral cultural shifts to accelerate circular economy businesses or services models in tourism? How
Well,
could this nudge for a more active protest?
Yeah, I think in general there's a natural evolution, right? Like if you look back at the 10, 20 years ago trends in tourism, they're not the same as today. Okay, so there's a natural evolution, and I think that that evolution at the current state is going towards higher value experiences, higher value, slower, more impactful for the person, right? Of course, there's always still going to be people in the market who are looking for the McDonald's version of the experience, right? And I think then it's the responsibility of that service provider to make sure they still have an ethical and social alignment with what they do. But in general, I think that there's this desire for things to be more meaningful. And in that, there's a lot of opportunity to transform the way services or experiences are created that then in turn have behavioral shifts. So if you just take a simple thing, like I mentioned in my talk, the cups, like the coffee cups, or disposable water bottles, like nearly every hotel in the world still uses disposable water bottles, yet they've banned straws. And to me, that's just like absolute hypocrisy. I understand the safety concerns around hygiene and you know, there are many countries in the world where you can't drink the tap water and you need to be very clear with your customers about safety, but there are so many other ways of providing that service. Like I said, I visited a plastic-free hotel in Bangkok, which is a country where obviously, you know, potable water is really important, but they were able to do that in a beautiful experiential way where you were able to borrow a beautiful reusable bottle and perhaps even buy it as part of your experience. And just these little small touch points that really communicate a value set to the customer that then as the customer, you're thinking, what a nice thought, what a nice experience, rather than the, you know, standard set of just a small plastic disposable water bottle. So I think that these small shifts, they really do have stronger nudges, as you talk about. And I think that one of the big problems though is that it's easy to just do what everybody else does. So that's what happens, right? Like somebody sets the status quo, or there's a natural progression to a status quo, and then everybody else just does it without even thinking about it. And that's really where there's a kind of a tragedy of the kind of follower syndrome, right? Where nobody's kind of pushing outside of the box and thinking, well, why do we have to do that? Why can't we add a completely different experience across our hotels? And I also find that when it comes to banning things, like the thing that happened with the plastic straws, like on one hand, it's great. It's like, okay, these companies are saying they respond to consumers' desires for a value alignment, okay? They hear them, they do something. But then to also have disposable coffee cups and disposable plastic water bottles and all of these other disposable things that, and not have thought about those, it's like, it's kind of like, oh, it's like, come on guys, you've already thought this thing through. Let's keep going with the thinking and the doing, you know? So I think the behavioral shifts or cultural shifts within the organization are just as critical as that within the desires from the customers. So there's that alignment that needs to happen. And I have worked with so many organizations where you have a meeting and you've got all these people and there's one person who's like, well, actually, I've been thinking about this for the last 6 months. I built a spreadsheet of all the other service providers. I just didn't want to say anything, you know, like, so it's like, find the person within your organization who's passionate about this, agentize them, give them the resources, you know, and test and iterate and see what you come up with, because it's very unlikely that the outcome is going to be worse than what you have today. So, you know, it's like, that relationship between customer desires, because also people are only going to ask for things that they've seen before, right? So you as the organization need to be willing to challenge and disrupt yourself and your own mindset and find ways to kind of go beyond the obvious.
Thank you, Lila. What you just said on corporate culture, let's say, is pretty much essential to make it happen, or to bridge the gap now between idea and action. But let me keep the focus on the final client or the consumer. And while preparing our interview, we had the opportunity to set up some topics, and you came up with a very interesting one, which is the pick and bias. Something coming from the pick and roll student in psychology. But for the people watching us, in other words, a pick and bias in terms or any other industry is about the way people evaluate an experience based on how they felt at this most intense point or at the end, rather than the experience journey as a whole. So please, how do how could the circular economy boost this peak and bias in a positive note for tourism?
Yeah, it's why if you eat dessert at the beginning of the meal, you won't enjoy the meal as much, because we do have this bias towards the last thing we had or the most impactful part of the experience. Although I'm not a huge dessert fan, I do think that there is a lot of opportunity to orchestrate the experience flow for people, customers, clients, whatever you want to call them, so that there is that the peak experience is of something of value that has a longer lasting impact. So I do think we always remember unique experiences over the obvious, right? It's the little abrupt change in our life when you go on holidays and you have an experience that is completely different to the one that you have at home. That's what you go home and tell people about. You don't go and say, well, I went there and it was exactly the same as home. It was delightful. I mean, most people go somewhere to experience something new and unique and valuable. And so we can actually bring that into the experience around take home changes. There's this other theory called habit disruptions, which talks about how most of us are willing to change our habits. So those performative aspects of our lives when we are in a moment of disruption. So when you have a baby or you move house or you go on vacation, those three are huge disruptors to your normal life. And as also is
the classic iconic moment of our life.
Yeah. So there's this huge opportunity to rewrite habits that perhaps are unsustainable or perhaps offer new opportunities or ideas of how to do things. I mean, I've learned so many things on vacation. I've got, I love doing cooking experiences. I love cooking, right? And I'm pretty good at it. I've even written a cookbook. But the thing is that if I go to Southeast Asia, I'm going to do a cooking experience because it's completely unique to what skill set I have. And I'm going to take those experiences home. And that's kind of one of the things. If you learn how to surf or if you go on a nature walk, like those experiences are what you take back to your normal life. So there's a lot of opportunity to offer this positive, disruptive habit shifts and changes to people, whether it be around trying, meat-free meals, or whether it be around, sustainable lifestyle options, whether it be around respecting and enjoying diverse cultures. There's so many opportunities there. And I think that, to your point, combining a peak end experience and really amplifying that deliciousness and sweetness of the dessert with the habit disruptions, a lot of organizers of experiences in the tourism sector could really help make transformative change and benefit because they've created this really valuable, memorable experience that people go home and tell people about. So, there's a lot of wins there.
Yeah, and at least for me, one of the most fascinating things of this way of thinking is that maybe in the end of the day, good memories or good value memories could become a core KPI for tourism. So if you assume the memories of an experience as a KPI for tourism, how could we measure it?
That's a really good point. I think, I think that it's making me reflect on my own experiences. I mean, before the crisis, I traveled a lot for work, and mainly for work, not for personal reasons. So I would always be busy or like a bit stressed because I was always doing many things. But if I think of the things that I remember, the things that I take home and that I tell people about, it's usually an experience of culture or of beauty, whether it be nature or humans, that is so mesmerizing that it becomes sticky, right? So if we think about, like, as you say, all of these little sticky moments of memory that become like the mental snapshots of our experience, and we take them home, and instead of putting on the old projector or opening up the phone and doing this, we tell people our memories, which is what we do because we're storytellers. And we tell them the funny thing that happened, the miscommunication with the waiter, and we tell them the bad experiences too. That's the other thing. We remember the good and the bad equally because of that habit disruptive moment. So I think that you could develop a matrix of measurement around that. I hadn't thought about it before. That would help, I guess, tour operators or tour providers, experience providers, understand from their customers what are the memorable moments, what are the unmemorable moments, and then use that as a continual improvement tool within the organization to say, well, here's the benchmark of what people experience from our offering. And here are the ways that we can improve that. And it's not just about like, you know, better customer service, because of course customer service is a big part of that, but those small things that add to people's value. It used to be putting a chocolate on people's pillows, but you know, I think too many people woke up with chocolate smeared across their face by accident, for that to actually be the most positive, memorable moment. I think now we're seeing more of these unique offerings, unique experiences. And so, yeah, I think that it's a great idea to consider doing that. And I hadn't thought about it before. So someone should give that a go.
We'll be able to talk about that afterwards. And great that it was useful for your work. If you're talking about this experience journey, and doesn't matter if you're going to create a new KPI on it or not, through observation to qualitative approaches or so on, this is going to be the same from the final consumer or the visitor perspective. Doesn't matter if the first world or well-developed country or a less developed country. But now talking on the other hand, for you, Leila, is it possible to talk about circular economy for developed versus developing countries in the same way? What should be different in terms of approach and priorities between these different destination profiles?
Well, basically, consumption equals impact when it comes to sustainability understanding, right? So the more a country consumes, the more impact the bigger the footprint of that country. And established economies have a higher consumption rate per capita than emerging economies. In fact, that's how we measure them with GDP. So emerging economies by default have a lower impact on the planet than established economies. Yet, the countries that set the tone around success and aspiration are the established economies. So you have a lot of this mimicking when it comes to food systems, for example, of, you know, countries that are emerging mimicking established. And so you actually have a huge problem because you have this aspiration, lots of travel, lots of meat, lots of plastic packaging, disposability, fast-paced culture. And this is set by established economies. And then you have emerging economies who say, well, this is success. And so they look to that and they replicate
the context.
So I think that that's a huge problem when it comes to, like I mentioned, this idea of the cup as well. So I noticed this in Lisbon. It really frustrated me because you would go into some service providers and they would have disposable cups and they would just give them to the tourists. And of course, they would never give it to a Portuguese or someone because that's like, why would I use a disposable cup? I'm having an espresso, you know, right? It's like culturally like just ridiculous. But you see these tourists walking around and if you ever ask a provider, they'll say, well, the tourists want them. And of course, they're not going to say, no, tourists, sorry, you have to sit down and have your coffee the Portuguese way, you know, and I think that that's a huge problem because what that does is that pandering to this like comfort and not, you know, not really thinking, from the tourist side of things, not respecting this diverse culture, and from the service provider, not finding a way to meet in the middle. You know, I think that that's kind of the same as this bigger picture between emerging and established economies, is that rather than finding a unique alternative, they just kind of replicate the status quo. So, you know, this is evidence in, for example, China used to actually take the majority of the world's recyclable material until 2018, when they announced the Golden Sword policy, which limited any importation of trash, whether it be recyclable or general waste, into China. And one of the reasons they did that was because the landfill that they had built outside of Beijing, which was supposed to last 25 years, was almost full after a few. And that was in part because of the cultural shift, as the economic advancement within the country of people ordering just like takeaway food at home in disposable packaging. And the fact that, you know, the amount of disposable products that we create, even if they are recyclable, the availability of recycling doesn't meet that, right? So I made that statistic, only 9% of all plastics ever produced have been recycled, as according to the National Geographic. And so we have this huge disconnect. So I guess it can be seen as different, of course, because every culture is different, whether you are high GDP or lower GDP. I think that the respect that needs to be applied to each culture, no matter what their GDP is around the values that they have that have benefits to the community and benefits to learn from. So I think a slower pace of coffee drinking is a benefit, right? Like it's a positive cultural benefit. Not being able to get vegetarian or vegan meals anywhere in Portugal is not. I can speak from my own experience of starving.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like the meat-based culture.
I am, and some few years ago now you can easily find it, but 10 years ago, really had a bad time trying to have
And
a
I
meal.
think that so it's about
But
reflecting on those things. And I think that when it comes to tourism, I mean, we have a lot of challenges around exploitation of natural resources in tourism, right? So, you know, the famous beach in Thailand was closed permanently because it was so destroyed by the increase in tourists going there. And we see that when, you know, there's hiking paths where people have created what we call in design desire paths, where here's the track and then people go up this way and it creates this new track and disrupting habitats or whatever else. So there is a big problem with just this like lack of respect for things that is not GDP specific, as well as that, you know, mirroring or replicating the wasteful societies that are of part of a high GDP. So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated area. I mean, we're diving deeper into the layers of this in this conversation. And for me personally, as someone who kind of, you know, works to try and help uncover and untangle some of these things, I think that, you know, cultural respect and identity is really important. So you don't get kind of swayed into the easier solution, but also every single country on this planet needs to address the waste crisis. Like the climate crisis is a very clear and present danger to us all with the increase in temperatures as a result of carbon emissions. And we know that the solution is to decarbonize the economy through changing our energy sources and our cars. And that's happening now. I mean, whether it happens quick enough is a different story. But we also have this huge waste crisis, and it's really significantly increased in the last decade. And it will continue to increase unless at tenfold, unless we address this devaluing of materials and this cultural reliance on disposability, which is what the circular economy is trying to address. If you look at it very fundamentally, the circular economy is how to design waste out of the economy. That's basically what it is, and how to increase value of things that are perceived as waste. So fruit and vegetables that are not the right size that are getting wasted, or fruit and vegetables, as we saw during the beginning of the COVID crisis, that didn't know how to meet a market. Like all of these crops just being plowed back into the ground because there was no easy market for them to get redirected. And there's all these contracts where they can't do it because they're supplying certain providers. And like some of the things that were exposed during the early, also people's obsession with hoarding toilet paper, you know, it has, I think, really created a bit of a kind of cultural reckoning of like what's important and what's not, and how tragic it is to see fields of food being destroyed when there are people going hungry, you know. And that's a kind of reality of our current supply chains, is that they are very unsustainable, and they were optimized in a time when, you know, you didn't have as many people, and you also didn't have as much kind of locking up of particular food sources. So you have a lot of contracts that limit the ability for a provider of food to sell to another party, you know. So anyway, I'm not going to go into the details of that, but yeah, so anyway, the point is that I think that there are lots of opportunities to reflect and to make change within each society, no matter what the GDP is.
Amazing, Leila, and thank you for sharing these two excellent examples, if you permit me to say that. The first, this extreme and absurd situation that you're facing in Europe, for instance, not to mention other regions, which is the size and the shape patterns to vegetables, and then how do you handle with the waste? And also the example you brought from China, like, and you shared this as well in our presentation in this Tourism Summit, which is we have been designing system with the waste built in. So this is definitely a problem. But I just have two more questions for you, and let me jump for a way lighter one. We already shared some examples here, but I'd like to ask you again, or as well in your personal opinion, if you'd like to share with us some of your favorite personal experiences when it comes to tourism, myths, good circular economy practices for a good experience in the end?
Yeah, well, I did mention my experience with this plastic-free hotel, which I really enjoyed because I really enjoyed, obviously I'm a easy target for that because I work in this space, but I just enjoyed the extra touches. I mean, there's always room for improvement for sure. I also find I've been to some ecotourism operators who have really worked very hard on sharing the story of change or why they do what they do with their customers, whether it be through small little booklets or whatever. And we love stories as humans, right? We're storytelling beings. So learning is a beautiful part of any travel experience. And also being able to escape into nature in a way that doesn't negatively affect the natural environment, because that's the other thing. Like, going on a speedboat in a what's it called? A coral reef might be a problem,
Being from Australia, you perfectly know that or heard about it.
Yeah, yes. Well, also dredging, in order to increase the size of the port so that ships can come in and destroy coral reefs like the Great Barrier Reef. Yeah. So there's always this conflict between economic development and nature, and that's really one of the big issues that we're trying to address. So I think for me personally, like I said, I don't often travel for tourism because of my, sustainability mindset. I try to, if I do travel for work, if I have the opportunity to enjoy a natural environment that's close by, then I always do that. But I think that some of the best examples I've seen are organizations who are combining that operational and experiential mindset within their company to create a full circle proposition, meaning that they've thought about the food, they've thought about the energy they use, they've thought about the quality of the sheets on their beds or whatever. And they've thought about their staff and they've educated their staff so that if you stop someone as you're walking through a hotel, they'll be able to tell you just as much about what's going on. And so you feel like you are part of a system of kind of respect, and exciting information gets shared with you and all these kinds of stuff. And I think there are some bigger chains that are doing that really well. And they're, making sure that the food waste from their breakfasts are getting, reused in the community that same day, and these kinds of things. And I, as the customer, am learning that and thinking how great that is, so those kinds of things. I will also say I've experienced so many absolutely appalling attempts at doing sustainability in companies, and I feel bad for them, because a lot of the time it's just that they haven't invested in understanding what is a sustainable solution and what is just greenwashing. And it's always a bit uncomfortable. It's like a really bad dad joke sometimes, you're like, why did you do that? Oh, stop it. Because
can you try to share one?
Yeah, I mean, just these attempts. I mean, organizations that do the things like with the towels where they have the information, and then every single thing else in the hotel room screams of anti-sustainability. So it just, the disjunct between those two things, it's like painful. So you think, well, you're just copying everybody else. And they're all, when I always hang my towel up, by the way, when they still come and take my towel and wash it. Like, you told me you were going to do the right thing and you didn't. Like, I'm furious. And also just with regards to like food provisions, like not considering, whether I mean, obviously I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat meat, but I think of all the people who don't eat certain things for religious reasons, and there's not that provision of food, or people who have allergies and just simple things like that. You think it's not that hard to like add this thing here to show that you've thought about different people. I think that as well, we're seeing companies have to respond to that, in the sense that we are seeing more and more people with like specialized needs, whether it be food or whether it be abilities to get around and all this kind of stuff. So we are seeing that be introduced. But yeah, I've had many hungry nights in hotels because there's literally been nothing I can eat. And I remember once ordering a salad in Spain and asking them to not put the bacon on it, and it came up with bacon. And it was so funny because the guy was like, oh, so you didn't want the bacon? Oh, why? And I was like, but eat it.
But bacon isn't meat. Bacon isn't meat. Maybe it's the answer, because really? No, sometimes you can have this kind of answer, and I totally see your point. Okay,
but also I find it fascinating.
Ham is not what?
But a lot of people don't eat pork products for religious reasons as well. So of all of the meats, that is one that has like the least people anyway, the point is that it's not to say that you should cater to one particular desire set, but having that consideration and care, it's kind of compassion and empathy for the customer and the person and the diversity of the world we live in. And I think that that's kind of the basic level of kind of organizational thoughts, is like, are we making sure that we are at least demonstrating our, like simple things like on menus, having, whether it's got gluten or whether it's got, these kinds of things. Organizations that don't do that, I feel like they're just kind of saying, well, we just don't really care if you can't eat what we're offering, And so I feel like those kinds of things are just a really obvious one that it's like, tick that off the list. I actually just developed a whole program around sustainability in business, because I've worked with so many organizations over the years, and I got a little frustrated because some of the really basic things were not getting addressed. And so I just made all these checklists and a workbook that's like, here's your journey. So, how to do environmental audits to understand where you have unnecessary waste, whether it be in energy, water, some of these practical things that, believe it or not, I think if you went to Google it, you wouldn't actually find a list of these kinds of strategies, or how to make sure you're working with your suppliers to ensure that they're reducing waste and all these kinds of things. So I've just gone on a huge process of discovery in that myself, and have found that there are so many simple steps that companies can make that are really not difficult, and actually will probably end up saving you money. Because it's about waste reduction, which is always a money saving. So.
For sure. And it's interesting to note, Leila, that the majority of your examples from the consumer side tends to be perceived or be detailed throughout the journey, but there are a lot of back office work to make it happen. And maybe this is a good hook to share with you my last question, which is, if you have a lot of back office work to be done, you need to run connections and run collaboration and get more expertise from different stakeholders. And from our side here, as a closing question, as you know, Beti used to work in the space of collaborative innovation, especially in the convergence of large companies, public institutions, and startups for pilot development. So I would like to have your last thoughts on it. What would be the role of the collaboration between these stakeholders to boost circular economy results in this industry? Like a last message to
well, like I was saying, I think food is one of the kind of most important sectors for us all, and also for the tourism industry, because it's such a key part of it, right? Like if you're in food and beverage, hotels, so local collaborations around food provision, and also trying to find ways to work with food providers that perhaps aren't engaging with regenerative or sustainable practices, so that they can slowly transform their offerings. Obviously packaging reduction, as well as like more seasonal produce, or providing seasonal menus, working with local farmers, all of these kinds of localized collaborative relationships. With the wine producers. Like, I find it also really strange when you have countries that have really interesting wine offerings, but then they have like extensive lists of like, wines from countries that are very far away. Like, I always find, and I'm always interested in, I always drink locally. I would say, what's local? What should I try? And I find that that's fascinating, because I've even had wine in Arizona, believe it or not, in the desert, they make wine, which was quite surprising. So I think that the local collaborations, creating narratives around those conversations as well. So sharing with the customer what it is, who it is, why and how they've been farming, and all those kinds of things. And then as well, I guess on the kind of less interesting side, you have working with your waste management companies to understand what are the most easy to process materials, so that if you are having single-use products, you can maximize the likelihood of them being recaptured efficiently. And then as well, working with your local energy providers, are there more sustainable energy options that you can bring in? Perhaps you could collaborate with a farmer to introduce wind power. I don't know, there's lots of different things, but I think part of the collaboration mindset is coming up with solutions that don't exist. Like, that's one of the reasons we collaborate. So you need to take those problems and turn them into opportunities. So if you've got a farmer that has a certain problem, and you have a hotel that has a problem, maybe together they can find a shared solution that's going to add value to both of them. And that's really what I think we should be always striving for, is adding more value through the things we do, and not just the economic value, but obviously social value and of course environmental as well.
Amazing, Leila. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I'm pretty much sure that anyone who's watching this episode of for our Betacast will figure out how huge and how systemic is this topic and why we shouldn't avoid it. So thank you so much again for being here with us. I'm sure if in case people would like to reach you out, should they try to visit disruptdesign.com? That's it? This is the best place?
disruptdesign.co. I also have my own website. I'm on all social media. You can find me, Leila Ajaralu. And then, of course, we have the Unschools. If people are interested in learning more about how they can adopt these practices, unschools.co. We have lots of resources, heaps of free things too, including a circular redesign kit that anyone can download and run through, as well as these new business sustainability programs. So yeah, lots of content, lots of other people doing this as well inside the Unschool community, which is really great. Excellent.
Leila, again, thank you so much. This was Betacast. Thank you for watching. You can subscribe, recommend, give us feedback. This is what we are about, collaboration to do it better. Thank you so much. See you next time.